Hello, everybody. Welcome back. We are here with a super special guest today with us, Dr. John Day. We've been just waiting for this interview to happen, so now it's happening. So I would like to introduce my co-host, Joshua. How are you doing today?
Hi, Mar. How are you? I was say before, I'm just really honored about to be in front of one of my favorite writers. I really like John's Day work. As always, I'm co-host here, but I'm the teacher of the divinity in the Escuela de Alexandria, and it's for me really special moment because we will speak about a lot about really interesting topics. So, well, I'm very excited actually.
Yeah, perfect. So with that in mind, we're going to introduce our guest, Dr. John Day. Pleasure to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you so much for accepting our interview. It's been long coming there, but it's just happening now. So, everybody, just to give you a lay of the land right now, Dr. John Day, he is an Old Testament scholar. He did both, a PhD from Cambridge, and also he had a doctorate on divinity from Oxford, nothing less than that. Dr. Day, please tell us just a little bit. What was it like to study one of the most prestigious universities around the world?
Well, I like Cambridge very much.
Yeah.
But they never gave me a job. So I ended up
really?
in Oxford instead, which was a big surprise, as I'd never been to Oxford before, hardly.
It was kind of an unexpected thing, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good for you.
I spent 9 years in Cambridge, and I'd hardly ever been to Oxford. It was a strange place, but that's where I ended up, where I met my wife, and I've been very happy in Oxford. So.
Oh, that's we're glad to hear that about you. So that's just nice.
I've now been here for 45 years.
Wow.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Wow, you've been around for a while.
I've been in Oxford for 45 years. Yes.
Yeah. So, we got I think it was a monograph revision, if we can call it that way. It was published in 1985, which is, it has to do with the god's conflict with the dragon,
Yes.
How was that? I mean, did you love writing that monograph? What was it like?
Yes. It was based on my doctoral thesis. It was an expansion of part of my doctoral thesis, which I got in 1977.
Oh, there it is.
First book, it took a long time in appearing.
Yeah.
Because I spent a lot of time, because I finished my doctorate in 3 years, which was far too fast.
Wow.
So it needed a lot of work on it to make it fit for publication.
Yeah. Okay, everybody.
And it's become a bestseller. I had to have it reprinted by Whitman Stock.
Yeah, I'm not. Yeah.
Because every week, Americans in particular were writing to me saying, "Do you have a spare copy?" And I didn't. And even the publisher had no more copies. So I decided to get it reprinted.
Well,
so
that's
you
good.
Get it a reprint in paperback much more cheaply.
Yeah, I think it was published by I think it was published by Whitman Stock. Yeah. Do you have a copy right there?
I'm trying to find a copy. One moment.
Okay. Please show us that copy. We would like to see it.
1 minute. Here you are.
Oh, beautiful.
Look at the dragon.
Yeah, that's Leviathan.
Yes.
Yeah.
Except Leviathan has 7 heads, but
he's taking a beating from the divine warrior.
I didn't choose the I didn't choose the picture.
I know. I know in the literature industry, you guys, the author, don't get to choose the cover of your books.
But my other books, I mostly did choose the pictures.
Oh, great. Yeah, that's why I'm
like this. I chose those not that one. I chose the 2 Genesis 1 to 11 ones.
Yeah, beautiful covers, by the way.
I had to pay the publisher for them because they had to get permission.
I imagine so. Yeah. Yeah.
And I choose those pictures as well. Yeah.
I personally like that one, the temple and worship in biblical Israel.
Yes.
That's really, really
The
500
top is,
pages, I think
is
it is.
Solomon's temple, and the bottom is Herod's temple.
Yeah.
I do not know, by the way, Dr. John, if you know, I am a part of it, currently studying theology. I'm an illustrator, and I actually very into ancient Near East mythology, for example.
Good.
That's my drawings.
Okay,
So,
very good.
if you ever need a cover, come with me. Okay? I can make it myself. As you wanted to. I actually have a drawing of the Leviathan with the 7 heads.
Yeah, he will
Seven
charge
heads.
you. Yeah, you won't have to pay him.
You don't have to pay me. Just tell me the
Yeah.
honor that it will be in the cover, and that's it.
Okay, guys, Dr. Day, what about if we go into the questions, because we want to respect your
Yes.
time.
Well, it's now 5:45. Yeah.
Yeah, let's do it.
45 minutes have gone and we haven't started.
Yeah, so let's get into it. Let's jump right in. So, Dr. John Day, please tell us, this is the first question. What is the meaning and background of the priestly creation story, Genesis 1:1 through chapter 2, 4a?
Well, this is the famous 6-day creation account.
Oh, really?
God creates the earth in 6 days and rests on the 7th. And that 7th day is an anticipation of the later Sabbath, the Shabbat. The essential things that the chapter says is, one, that God created the world, and that, two, humanity is God's supreme work, made in the image of God and designated to rule over the world in a benign way. That's the essential message. But it's expressed in very primitive language, except a few million mad North Americans who usually vote for Trump. Not many of us believe in a 6-day creation, but quite a lot of Americans do, I believe. Half of North Americans don't believe in evolution. But, if you believe in the evolutionary process, we have to accept that Genesis 1 is not a literal account. It's like a picture story. It's a parable. And remember that Jesus' favorite method of teaching was in parables. And we could regard the stories of Genesis 1 to 11 as parable-like. They're not actually parables, but they're you could say a bit like parables. They're
Okay.
stories. They're not history. They're stories.
Stories. Yeah.
Now,
like that.
can I say, what is the background? Well, a lot of scholars think that this story is based on the Babylonian creation epic called Enuma Elish. I personally think this is quite mistaken. The order of creation in the Babylonian creation epic is quite different from Genesis 1. And although both Genesis 1 and the Babylonian creation epic start with watery beginnings, lots of creation stories start with a watery beginning. So there's nothing really, in my view, that supports seeing the Babylonian creation epic behind it. In my personal view, and I've written an article on this that will appear in a year or two's time, in my views, the Genesis 1 is based on Psalm 104. If you look at Psalm 104, it has the same order of creation as Genesis 1. But of course, some scholars think that Psalm 104 was based on Genesis 1. Someone called it Genesis 1 set to music. But there are many indications, and I don't have time to elaborate, that suggest that the Psalm is older than Genesis 1. There are many things that suggest that. And so I think that Genesis 1 has taken up the Psalm and set it out systematically. That's my personal view. So it's not a scientific account. It's a simple, primitive account. Remember, the ancient Hebrews, they believed in a 3-decker universe, heaven up there, the underworld down there and earth here. today, if we have a scientific mind, we don't think like that. So the story is presented in early primitive terms because the biblical writer could do no other. The biblical writer didn't know about modern science, you know. They had to make do with their own understanding of the world. And through that, they expressed their faith that God was the creator and that human beings were God's supreme work. Now, some people think that's a bit arrogant to think we are God's supreme work. But when you look at everything that happens, we send men to the moon, you know, I think, you know, we create the internet. I mean, you have to accept that we are the supreme work on this earth. And the writer, I think, got that correct. Many people don't realize that at the end of Genesis 1, human beings are vegetarian. Of course, historically, that's not true, but the writer presents that as a kind of an ideal. That humans are vegetarian. So when it talks about humans ruling the world there, in Genesis 1:26 following, it's obviously meant in a benign sense. You know, nobody's being killed. You know, it's a benign picture of human rule. And so there's a message for us today with our environmental crisis, you know, to treat the environment kindly.
That's eco-theology. So, you know, on the vegetarian thing, I need to tell you something, Dr. Day. Now, following this interview, you're gonna get your meal, so you don't get to eat just vegetables.
Well, actually, I don't eat a lot I don't eat a lot of meat, actually. Mainly sausages.
I love sausages.
In
so
fact,
we can go with that.
In fact, they're not vegetarian sausages, I'm afraid. But I don't. I'm not a vegetarian myself, but I don't eat much meat. Compared with most people, I don't eat much meat. So I'm making an effort.
just to to get the gist of your first answer, so we don't have to read this Genesis account, the first verses on the first chapter. We don't have to read it with the modern mindset. That should be like second nature that's for scholars.
Yes.
But we lay people, we need to understand this is an ancient way of telling how the world came to being. And it doesn't have to do at all with scientific matters, right?
No.
Thank you.
No.
Thank you.
But the writer was using primitive science, you might say. They were
really?
Using you know, the heaven was up there and the earth and the hell down below and the earth is here. That was their scientific view. I mean, it's not scientific in our sense.
Can we say that's the ancient
the ancient view of the world?
Ancient view of the world,
But unlike, we can say, but there's only basically one God who is, plus his divine council, one God with his heavenly assembly, who's involved in creating the world. Right, perhaps you should go on to the next question.
Yes,
have I said
please.
Enough on Genesis 1?
Let's go with that.
There's a whole chapter in, I've written several chapters about Genesis 1 in my latest book, so
I know.
You can read more there if you want to.
And
so I will just say one thing. One thing
go ahead.
Can I say, one thing I've discovered is most scholars assume that in Genesis 1, the morning comes first and the evening afterwards. But if you read Genesis 1, it constantly, each day it talks about the evening and the morning. So I argue in my latest book that in Genesis 1, the evening comes before the morning. And that also fits in with the Sabbath, because the seventh day is an anticipation of the Sabbath. And you may know that with the Sabbath up to today, it starts in the evening and goes on to the morning. So that's one thing I'm saying in my article that isn't commonly accepted, but I think is correct. Another thing is, there's a problem about Genesis 1 verse 1. In the beginning, God made the heaven and earth. How does that relate to the rest of the chapter? There are some people, I argue that it is actually God's first act. God makes heaven and earth in their primeval form. They're not complete yet. They're in their primeval form, and that what we have afterwards is adding to that, adding to things in the heaven, adding to things on the earth. But it's just in their original primeval form with nothing there. But many scholars think that Genesis 1 verse 1 is a summary of the whole chapter, that the heaven and earth is a way of talking about the whole completed universe. But the way I take it, it's interestingly, is how all Jews and Christians took it for the first 1,000 years AD. It was only with Rashi that Rashi, who's a a Jewish commentator, who thought we should translate it in the beginning when God created the heavens and the earth.
Oh, really?
Earth being without form and void. And you'll find that in many modern North American translations. But most European translations still follow what I think is the correct version. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. But there's still a question how you interpret it, and I've told you my interpretation. So maybe now
I was reading I was reading a book on ancient thought, and in that book, the author argues that there are a bunch of Hebraists who argue and advocate the when God began. People like Robert Alter, Michael Heiser, Hobbins, Sommer.
It's common. Almost all. Can I say almost all North Americans follow that translation?
Exactly. Yeah, you're right.
It's wrong.
Yeah. That's true. That's true.
Can I tell you why they take that view?
Yeah,
it's
please.
Because in the Hebrew it says bereshit.
Yeah.
And they take, Hebrew. They take that to be the construct in the beginning. The
construct state. Yeah.
But the fact is, if you know Hebrew, you should know that in Hebrew expressions of time, the definite article is always omitted. So it's their way of saying in the beginning. Have you noticed the British say in the light of and Americans say in light of, but it means the same thing. So in beginning means in the beginning. If you take the expression forever, la'olam, it's la'olam, not la'olam, without the definite article. And second Isaiah talks about me reshit, from beginning, not me ha reshit. So it's common with expressions of time to omit the definite article. It doesn't mean you have to translate it differently. It just means they didn't put the in where we would. Anyway, that's what I argue.
Got you. Okay, let's move on to the second question, shall we?
Yeah, okay.
All right. So,
good.
Dr. Day, which are some of the problems of interpretation of the story of the Garden of Eden?
Well, if you are a fundamentalist, which you're not, if you're a fundamentalist and take the story
I'm not either.
you immediately have a problem because the order of creation is different from Genesis 1. So what do you do about it? In case some people haven't realized, in Genesis 1, man and woman are created at the end, after the vegetation. But in Genesis 2, in the Garden of Eden story, the man is actually made before the garden. The man is made before the vegetation, and the woman comes last of all. So if you think they're both literal accounts, how do you fit Genesis 2 into Genesis 1? But if you're a modern critical scholar, you would know you have two different sources with their different accounts. So it's not surprising that they differ. Anyway, that's a problem for fundamentalists. But there are also problems for modern scholars. For example, God threatened Adam and implicitly Eve with death if he ate from the tree of knowledge. Well, he ate from the tree of knowledge and he doesn't die on that day. So is God a liar, as some scholars say? I mean, is he a liar?
Some say God lied.
Some scholars say that, which I think will be a rather surprising thing. But so I reject that view. I also reject the view that it's metaphorical death, because every time the Bible talks about, you will die, it's always meant in a literal sense. I think the best solution, and this is the majority view actually, So I here agree with the majority. The majority view is that God is merciful. He decides to be kind and not carry out his original threat. Although they do die eventually because they're cast out of the garden, they are denied access to the tree of life, and so they eventually die. Another problem for scholars is, what on earth is wrong with the knowledge of good and evil? Why should God not want human beings to know good and evil? In the Bible, in the Bible generally, it's sort of a good thing. We know what right is, we know what wrong is, and it's clear that this is another way of speaking of wisdom. And generally in the Bible, wisdom is thought of as a good thing.
Yes.
So what's God doing here? I think the most likely explanation is that God is posing a test for Adam and Eve to see if they can obey him. And he probably was in the long term in wanting them to become wise, but to become wise through obeying him, not through eating a magic plant, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Another question is, where is the Garden of Eden? I mean, most of us today would not think there was a literal place, but the writer clearly thought there was a literal place. In verses 10 to 14 of Genesis 2, we're given some details of its location. And it suggests to me that it's thought of as being in Armenia, at the source of the Tigris and Euphrates. But verse 8 says that Eden was in the east and Armenia is in the north. How do you explain that? That's another problem. I think most scholars think that verses 10 to 14, the detailed account of the location of Eden, is a later addition. It's an interruption. It interrupts the story. The story flows much better if you cut those verses out. So I think the original writer implied that Eden was in the east, and this was the view of a later editor. If you look at Ezekiel 28, Ezekiel chapter 28, you have a variant account of the story of the Garden of Eden. And there Eden seems to be in Phoenicia, because the king of Tyre in Phoenicia is said to have been there.
Oh, really?
So there were obviously different views on where Eden was. Another rather more theological question is, are we to think of the man as in the garden to begin with as mortal or immortal? Traditionally, Christians thought that the man was originally immortal, and then because he disobeyed, he was made mortal. But most scholars today now, I probably think that the man was originally mortal, but he missed his chance for immortality. He missed his chance because he disobeyed God and was cast out of the garden, and so didn't eat of the tree of life. Because originally, the tree of life was not forbidden. Humans were allowed to eat it. But it seems to me they hadn't got round to eating it yet. I hadn't noticed it. They hadn't. So I would say that the man and woman, they're potentially immortal in the garden. They're mortal, but potentially immortal, but they missed their chance through disobedience. Something I would like to emphasize very much is, although the story of the Garden of Eden is not historical. I mean, we don't believe in talking snakes and magic plants that make you immortal by eating them. This is the stuff of myth. But the Garden of Eden story is profoundly true theologically, I would say. And it speaks profound psychological truth.
Yeah.
If you notice, the man blames the woman and the woman blames the serpent. This is true to human nature. Human beings like blaming other people for when they do wrong. Look at your politicians. They're always blaming other people. Politicians never accept that they've done something wrong, are they? Well, maybe it's different in Honduras. I mean, I'm speaking of Britain anyway. They never want to admit they made a mistake.
No, same here in Honduras.
They're the same everywhere.
Yeah,
and it's true of humanity.
Everywhere.
So it's a very good picture of human nature. Even though historically it's not a true story, but theologically and psychologically, it's very true. It's also true in the sense that it's a picture of every man. Adam means man or humanity. It's a picture of us that we disobey God and shut ourselves off from God's presence. And so theologically and psychologically, I think it's profoundly true, even though in terms of its genre, it's myth. But myth doesn't mean it's rubbish. You know, myth
it's
is often a profound way of
a made up
stating.
thing. Yeah.
And I can say also, as I said earlier, remember that parables were Jesus's favorite method of teaching.
Yeah.
And I think the stories in Genesis 1 to 11 are a bit like parables. They're not history, they're stories with a important point they're making. And you have to try and see what the point is, as with Jesus's parables.
Yeah, it's about deeper truths. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
There's different kind of truth. And many people in the modern world think the only truth is historical truth, but that's nonsense.
That's
look at great literature like Shakespeare. I speak as an Englishman. He's our greatest.
You're biased.
A lot of his work is not actually proper history, but it's it has profound truth in it.
Yes.
And a lot of the Bible is like that.
I agree.
The
Okay,
Old Testament, anyway.